everyone, it's Alex here. I just got off my match in Grandstand, and I just want to thank you all.
Quite possibly you are the most popular Filipino in the world, am I right? It feels pretty special.
It's so special, you know, they make me more and more special, you know, to be Filipino is something I take.
Flushing Meadows has hosted 100 years of tennis history. Serena's farewell. Federer breaking down in tears on Ash. Sinner getting crowned under the lights. But in the last week of August 2026,
Electric, and you guys made it so special, especially coming back after being in a difficult situation in the third.
Staff at the US Open quietly admitted something they have never once had to say in a century of running this tournament. They were not ready. An entire foreign country's population was showing up
from a family with deep roots in Philippine sports and the resources to develop a child's talent at the highest level. Balls, and he showed up to every practice. By 12, it was clear that she had outgrown everything the Philippines could.
To watch one player, a player who, 12 months earlier, wasn't even a household name in her own country. Sit with that for a second, because it doesn't fully make sense yet. It's not supposed to.
Hundreds of Filipino fans during her practice session out the back of Melbourne Park this morning. Eala is number 49 in the world, and she's really captivated the hearts and minds of the Filipino community here in Melbourne.
By the time this video ends, it will. Here's what I'm going to show you. Why a four-time Grand Slam champion says this player has something most veterans never develop. Why the
refreshing and nice to see how well she's handled like all of the kind of fandom and stardom that's come with her.
President of the Philippines personally pulled her into the presidential palace for an honor usually saved for people with decades of achievement behind them. Why one tournament chairman admitted, almost sheepishly, that 8 out of every 10...
I mean, for me, I think it's great. Like, just now, I finished my match and
ticket calls he received were about a single name, not the top seed, not the defending champion, one player, ranked outside the world's top 40 at the time. And there's a number near the end of this video, a ranking climbs so fast it barely looks real on paper, that I promise you will change how you watch every match she plays from here on. Her name is Alex Eala. She's 21 years old, left-handed, from Quezon City. And in less than 2 years, she has quietly become the most successful tennis player the Philippines has ever produced, man or woman, in over 100 years of the sport being played there. That sentence alone should stop you. A country of more than 100 million people. A century of tennis history. And it took until 2025, 2026, for someone to finally break through. Why now? Why her? Keep that question in your head, because the answer is stranger than talent alone. Let's ground this in the numbers first, because once you see them lined up in order, the noise around her stops sounding like hype and starts sounding like a pattern nobody predicted. At the start of 2025, Eala was ranked outside the world's top 100, a solid number, the kind that gets you into qualifying draws and not much else. By the end of August 2026, 20 months later, she had climbed to a career-high ranking around world number 18, the highest ranking any Filipino, man or woman, has ever reached in WTA Tour history. Along the way, she quietly collected a list of firsts that reads almost like a checklist someone wrote for her in advance. First Filipino to crack the world's top 20. First to beat a top 10 opponent. First to reach the 4th round of a Grand Slam. And in August 2026, the first Filipino ever, full stop, to win a WTA Tour singles title, beating former world number 3 Jessica Pegula in a rain-delayed final in Washington, D.C. To understand exactly how big a drought that ended, you have to go back decades, further than you'd think. Philippine tennis last had a real moment on the world stage in the late 1980s, when the country's Davis Cup team put together a run that briefly got international attention. After that, almost nothing. No majors. No top 100 rankings. No real relevance on the global stage for close to 30 years, in a country where basketball, boxing, and volleyball have always owned the national sporting conversation, and where tennis courts, coaching pipelines, and funding were never built to produce a player like this. Eala didn't just end that drought. She turned a niche curiosity into something now genuinely being described inside the Philippines as a national movement. And she did it faster than almost anyone climbs a tour ranking in the modern game. None of that happened by accident, and it didn't happen overnight either, which matters, because it's part of what makes what's coming next so strange. She started playing at 4 years old at a country club outside Manila, coached first by her own grandfather, who showed up to every practice. By 12, it was already clear that the Philippines' tennis infrastructure had nothing left to offer her. So at 13, she and her brother left home for Mallorca, Spain, to train at the Rafael Rafael Nadal Academy on a scholarship, a facility that, without that kind of support, costs tens of thousands of dollars a year just to attend. She turned pro in 2020 and spent years grinding through qualifying draws that almost nobody outside serious tennis circles ever watches, climbing slowly, quietly, long before any of this attention existed. That's the part people forget when a story like this suddenly explodes. By the time the camera showed up, she'd already been doing the work, invisibly, for the better part of a decade. Now here's where the story stops being just about tennis, and this is the part one don't think anyone fully saw coming, including, it seems, the people running some of these tournaments. In July 2026, after a breakthrough Wimbledon run, where she became the first Filipino ever to reach the second week of a Grand Slam, beating defending champion IGA Świątek along the way in a tiebreak that went all the way to 11-9, Eala was summoned to Malacanang Palace by President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., who presented her with a Presidential Citation. That's one of the country's highest civilian honors, and it is almost never given to someone this early in a career. Usually it's reserved for people with decades of accomplishment behind them. Marcos didn't try to hide how starstruck he was. "I'm a fan, so I'm gushing, okay?" he told her, grinning through the ceremony, adding that she reminds Filipinos why we are a great race. Eala, visibly emotional, told him she felt very seen, that all the hours of work that never once made it onto a television screen finally felt validated in that room. Stop and actually picture that. A sitting head of state, in a country where tennis has always ranked behind basketball, boxing, and volleyball in the national imagination, treating a professional tennis player like a returning war hero. That's not routine political theater. Politicians pose for photos with athletes all the time, it rarely looks like this. And here's the part that should make you lean in a little closer, this wasn't a one-off. It's the same pattern, showing up again and again, at every single stop on tour, all year, and it kept escalating in ways that caught tournament after tournament off guard. Rewind to January 2026. Melbourne, Australian Open. Eala was still ranked around world number 49, solid, respectable, nowhere near a household name outside hardcore tennis circles. And yet, before she played a single official match that tournament, hundreds of Filipino fans reportedly swarmed her practice courts, crowding around for autographs and photos in numbers organizers hadn't planned space for. Nobody officially clocked it as a warning sign yet. It just looked like a nice moment for an emerging player. In hindsight, it was the first tremor. Fast forward to August, Washington, D.C. The Mubadala D.C. Open. This time, tournament chairman Mark Ine said something on the record that turned the story from a nice moment into something much harder to ignore. Asked about ticket demand in the lead-up to the event, he told reporters that at least 80% of the ticket inquiries his office was fielding that month were specifically about one question: when is Alex Eala playing? Let that number sit for a second, because the draw that week wasn't thin on star power. It included Naomi Osaka, a two-time US Open champion, Venus Williams, Madison Keys, top seed Jessica Pegula, a former world number 3. And still, 8 out of every 10 calls were about a player who, at that point, had never won a tour-level title in her career. Then the final itself got pushed by rain into a Monday slot, historically one of the worst attendance windows in professional tennis, because people have jobs to get back to and flights already booked. Tournaments dread Monday finals. Stadiums empty out. The crowd came anyway. Philippine flags through the stands, fans on their feet through nearly every service game, chanting loud enough to drown out the usual polite tennis hush. Ine himself called it, right there at the trophy ceremony, one of the greatest crowds the tournament had ever produced for a Monday final in its history. Now here's the detail that I think is even stranger than the crowd itself, because it's not about the fans. It's about the woman who lost. Jessica Pegula stood at that podium afterward, having just lost the biggest final of her season, and instead of the usual polite runner-up lines, she said something with real warmth in it. She talked about how refreshing it was to watch Eala handle the fandom and stardom that's come with representing an entire country, praising her maturity in carrying that weight, week after week, and said plainly that she has a lot of respect for her. Think about how rare that actually is. The player who just had her trophy taken away from her, on her own tour, in front of a hostile crowd, chose to publicly credit her opponent's supporters with elevating the sport itself. That's not the reaction of someone who sees a viral moment. That's the reaction of someone who sees something structural shifting in real time. And then there's Naomi Osaka, a 4-time Grand Slam champion who knows exactly what it feels like to become the face of an entire country's relationship with tennis, because she lived that experience herself in Japan. Osaka beat Eala once and lost to her once during that same Washington run. They met in the semifinal, with Eala winning, and afterward, asked directly what she made of the interest Eala was generating, Osaka didn't hedge. She said she thinks it's it's awesome. She described riding back from her own match in a golf cart, looking over at a practice court that was completely packed, wondering out loud who was even playing, only to realize Eala hadn't even walked on court yet. She called the fans so kind, and said some of them had stayed behind to cheer for her own match later that night, purely out of respect for what Eala had shared with the crowd. Her verdict: Eala is building a new community around the sport, and that's good for the game as a whole. Days later, Toronto, the National Bank Open. Same pattern, showing up again before Eala had even played a real tournament match, except by now nobody running these events could pretend it was a coincidence anymore. Asked about the atmosphere, Eala herself gave an answer that reframed the entire thing in her own words, that it wasn't just for her. It was for her family, and for, in her words, all the little girls with ruffled socks and chubby cheeks who now finally have someone to point to. So here's the honest, slightly uncomfortable question sitting underneath everything I've just walked you through. Underdog stories in tennis almost always follow the same shape: a great week, a nice headline, and then the news cycle quietly moves on to the next thing. That is the pattern, every year, in every sport. What makes this one different is that it never followed that shape. It didn't fade after Melbourne. It didn't fade after Washington. It didn't fade after Wimbledon, or after Malakanang. Every single stop got bigger than the one before it, and by the time she reached New York for the US Open, tournament staff were openly admitting, on the record, that nothing in a century of planning had prepared them for a following like this attached to a player who, 20 months earlier, wasn't even ranked inside the world's top 100. I want to be straight with you about something before we get to the end of this, because I think it actually makes the real story more impressive, not less. There are numbers attached to this story circulating online right now that I could not verify through solid, sourced reporting, things like exact press conference view count comparisons between Eala and players like Carlos Alcaraz or Aryna Sabalenka. I looked. I couldn't confirm them cleanly enough to put them in front of you as fact, so I'm leaving them out rather than repeating a number just because it sounds impressive. What's left after you strip all of that away? The ranking climb from outside the top 100 to a career-high number 18 in 20 months, the Washington ticket data straight from the tournament chairman's own mouth, the Malakanang ceremony, Pegula's, and Osaka's on-record comments, is dramatic enough without any embellishment at all. Sometimes the confirmed version of a story is the more remarkable one. So here's where that leaves us, heading into the second week of the US Open. If Melbourne was the first tremor and Washington was the proof, what does New York become? A career-high ranking. A sitting president personally honoring her before a room of top officials. Rival players, the ones who actually lost to her, publicly crediting her with growing the sport rather than resenting the spotlight. And a tournament that has run for 100 years admitting, out loud, that nothing in its planning documents ever accounted for this. Whatever happens on the scoreboard over the next 2 weeks, that part of the story is already written. The only real question left is how much bigger this gets from here, and whether tennis, as an industry, is even built to keep up with it. If you want to keep following this one round by round, with numbers that are actually checked and not just repeated because they sound good, subscribe now, because I'm tracking this through the rest of the tournament. And I want your honest read in the comments. Is this the start of a genuinely new tennis market opening up for good, or does a story like this need her to keep winning to survive the moment New York goes quiet again? Tell me where you land. See you in the next one.